So let's bring in Dave Keating, our correspondent who's been observing matters at the summit. Dave, good evening to you. Nice to have you back. All this must be making for quite a tense atmosphere.
Yeah, it is. And European Council President Donald Tusk, speaking at his final press conference just now, was keen to kind of tamp down that tension. He said, really, nobody in the European Council wants an interinstitutional conflict with the European Parliament over this. They want to be able to nominate someone in June, and they want that person to be acceptable to the European Parliament. But essentially what's happened here tonight is, well, Merkel and Macron agreed to disagree, and they put this discussion or the decision off until June. In the meantime, Donald Tusk is going to head over to the European Parliament, just a little ways down the road, and talk to the group leaders and see who has the majority to be confirmed. Under the EU treaties, the European Council of 28 national leaders has the right to appoint the European Commission president, but that person must survive a majority vote in the European Parliament. Now, last time in 2014, they started this new system called the Spitzenkandidaten system, lead candidate in English, where the political groups in the Parliament nominated a lead candidate for European Commission president, and that person campaigns during the election, and in theory, the person who attracts the most seats or who can command a majority in the parliament should become the European Commission president. But this system is deeply opposed by French President Emmanuel Macron. He doesn't like it. He does not want a Spitzenkandidat to be proclaimed. Angela Merkel is defending the system, so kind of representing the point of view of the European Parliament. But of course, she has an ulterior motive because it's her party that came first in the election. And so she wants Manfred Weber. And so what they've said today is, Donald Tusk, you go to the Parliament and you talk to them and you figure out what would be acceptable to them. Donald Tusk telling us just now that he is going to do everything he can to avoid a protracted interinstitutional conflict, because that's really the last thing the EU needs right now.
Indeed, in this world of increasing Euroscepticism, I'm thinking about Brexit, I'm thinking about the Salvini situation in Italy. People are trying to drum up a similar thing in France, but it isn't quite the same. We know that, don't we? But with this growing Euroscepticism, the rise of the far right, as we're led to believe, this kind of dispute isn't good for the EU and its image, is it?
Yeah, it's not a good look. On the other hand, what Merkel and the Parliament are defending is, in theory, a democratic system to select the European Commission president. And that, after all, is one of the big criticisms of the EU, that it's not democratic enough. But Macron counters that you can't just say the system is democratic and that makes it so, because nobody really heard of these Spitzenkandidaten before the debate. At France 24, we had a debate between the top two. I think some media outlets have done some efforts to try to get people familiar with these candidates, but it's very difficult to kind of educate the public as a whole about how this system works. And Macron has said, look, unless you have transnational lists, unless you have these top candidates actually on the ballots for everyone, this doesn't work. So on one hand, a protracted battle between the institutions could look like insider baseball, kind of bureaucratic nonsense to most people. But Macron thinks that this is worth fighting for. He thinks that a bad system, a bad European Commission president, isn't what the French people expect from him. And he really thinks Manfred Weber would be a very bad Commission president. I can tell you here in Brussels, that is kind of the consensus. Nobody is really excited about him. I do have to say we did observe a real uptick in support for Margaret Vestager, the liberal Spitzenkandidat. She's currently the competition commissioner. She's from Denmark. She used to be the vice prime minister, the deputy prime minister there. Lots of EU leaders mentioned her as they were coming in tonight. And really, she's only one of the four top names that people are talking about. She's the only one that doesn't have major opposition against her. Macron opposes Manfred Weber. Franz Timmermans, the candidate of the center-left, is majorly opposed by the Visegrad Four, Poland and Hungary, because he's gone after them on rule of law violations. And Michel Barnier is opposed by the European Parliament because he wasn't a Spitzenkandidat. that leaves Margaret Vestager, and she may be just the compromise candidate that people are asking for. She also has something else going for her. She was really vague during the campaign about whether she was a Spitzenkandidat at all, because her ALDE group doesn't support the process, because they were trying to woo Macron into joining their group. They said, we will oppose the process. They just repeated that this morning. They refused to sign off on an European Parliament declaration supporting the system. So Vestager could make the European Parliament happy by being a Spitzenkandidat, but also make the European Council happy by saying, look, I don't actually really like this system. This isn't a commitment to keep this system forever. Let's either ditch it or drastically change it the next time European elections happen.
Dave Keating, thank you very much indeed. Dave Keating, our correspondent there at the EU Summit.